But yeah, so I was getting, hello.
I was...
Pay attention. So this is actually this is good because this is a cognitive discussion. So I had my pre-DBS testing I told you about. And
Did you pass?
I did. Actually, we're going to talk about that. Welcome to The Secret Life of Parkinson's, a podcast created by people living with Parkinson's to help break the stigma of a disease no one likes to talk about. Now, here are your hosts, Jessica Krauser and Brian Baker. I am approved for DBS, but one of the doctors that I met was, I'm going to say it wrong now, Dr. Magnuson.
You got it.
Yay! So welcome, Dr. Magnuson. Thank you so much for coming on.
Thank you.
So he is with Ohio Health in the
Neuropsychology.
Neuropsychology. I was going to say
correct.
Psychiatric. So neuropsychology. So tell us a little bit about what you do, and then we have some questions to dig into.
Sure. So just as you said, I'm a neuropsychologist. So my background is in psychology, but then I went on to do a postdoctoral fellowship in neuropsychology. And basically what I do is I look at the relationship between the brain and behavior. And more specifically, we look at any type of central nervous system pathology and how that can influence or affect brain functioning. So brain functioning primarily means things like cognition, memory, and attention. But we also look at things like emotions, social functioning. So really any kind of function that can come from the brain.
What?
The lack of social functioning, the
Lack
lack of emotion, the lack of...
Just because you don't smile or use your facial expressions doesn't mean you have lack of emotion.
Oh, okay.
So what's interesting is I actually had this test done. What's it called?
A neuropsychological test.
That's okay. So I had this neuropsychological test done 3 years ago. So actually when we started this podcast, because I took a step back from work and I started working part-time. And basically I wanted to not prove to other people, but prove to myself and other people that what I was going through, like cognitively, wasn't just me being down on myself. Because I knew in my head, I'm like, I cannot formulate a clear thought. I'm not good at brainstorming anymore. I'm not good at organizing my thoughts or organizing what I'm doing. And as a marketer, it's like a huge issue. And I would still I would pull it together, but it would take me way too long and I would get really frustrated. And again, I just didn't feel like I was doing the best work that I could do. And everybody was like, no, you're fine. So I did that basically for that very reason, to tell people. And so now 3 years later, so what I found out is I performed fine, but my executive function was lower than where it should have been compared to like my age, being female, et cetera. And I think that there was another part that was lower. 3 years later, I took it again because of the pre-DBS testing stuff that you have to do. And I scored higher on some of those areas. Okay, now you can get emotion, get excited, be like, wow, Jess, that's great.
Is that because you're on medication? Is it because you're not working and you have a lot of stress?
So we're going to let the doctor answer.
Yeah, and so the reason is it's probably many factors that can contribute to that. One of the biggest ones, though, for many people, and I think they often overlook this, is the influence of stress on cognitive functioning. And we know that stress absolutely can hinder our cognitive functions, and it just makes us so that our thinking skills aren't as clear. Or I think a lot of times what people say to me when they describe it is it makes their cognitive functions just more effortful. It's not as automatic. So when someone says, hey, go pick up A, B, and C at the grocery store, whereas you otherwise would just remember it and it's nothing. When you're having a lot of stress on the brain, you have to think about it more effortfully. Okay, I need to remember to do this. And it's just more challenging to be able to recall that information on demand when you need it. So yeah, stress is a big part of it.
So was it the exact same test though?
No. Oh, no. So they do different tests.
Okay.
So I at least knew what I was getting myself into, but it doesn't make it any easier of how they do the colors.
No.
So we do it at the gym too. So it's it could be red, blue,
Oh,
green.
where it's written in one color that spells out the other color.
Yeah, so it could be a green color, but it says red.
Right.
So we practice that at the gym at PD Next Steps. And so, I mean, I remember even for like the first, I don't know, couple years that I would do that at the gym, like I couldn't get it, or I couldn't think of a word when Melissa's like, say something that begins with Y. And I would literally think of like yellow, and I couldn't think of anything else except for yellow. And so, but what I found is over time, after reducing the stress of like, not working and things like that, that I was able to do it. Because it's not that I was even, I knew what to expect. I was able to do it faster and more accurately. The stories are still really hard, so.
Everybody says that.
Yeah. But I think talking about the impact of stress is really important. But I think what's even more important is if you can kind of clarify for people what stress could actually mean. Because I think when people think of stress, they're thinking of like the worst, heaviest situation ever. And it's really not. It could be just, interacting with somebody that you just met. Or so how would you define that so people understand it's like, well, I'm not stressed. I don't work. I don't do this. It's like, there's still stress in your life.
Absolutely, yeah. And, I think it's also important to recognize that stress isn't necessarily due to bad things. There are good things in our lives that bring us stress as well. So, every year around December, we all tend to get a little bit more stressed out. It's a fun time of the year, but, that is a lot of chaos, and there's a lot of extra social obligations, and there's a lot of things on our to-do list. Most of them are pretty fun, but it can still be a very stressful time of the year. So stress can definitely be due to fun things. But I also like to think of stress as just sort of an umbrella term that talks about everything from, social interactions. For some people can be very stressful. There can also be, some depression can be a stressful trigger, or anxiety can be a stressful trigger. And we know that when it comes to Parkinson's, most people are aware that when you get a little bit more anxious, maybe the tremors tend to increase. And I think that's a great example to show how our stress, or in other words, our emotions, can influence our physical functioning, our cognitive functioning. We are all one system that's interconnected, and it influences everything from, emotional, physical, cognitive functioning.
So what would you recommend, like, for people, like, again, because like I guess stressed when I'm watching my daughter play basketball. And so I'm going there tonight, and it's like, literally, it was so like, this is where you should come actually to this game and sit on the other side. Cause like, I get so disconnected. I'm like going like this, and I'm like moving around, and I'm like trying to act like I'm cheering, but I'm literally just moving around so much. Cause I'm like excited for her, and like when they're going. So it's like, what any thoughts or recommendations when you do even have good stress?
Yeah. So, I think the biggest thing, the number one thing, is we want to just become more aware of it, or be more cognizant of the stress. And I think that when we're in the midst of it, it's so easy to, overlook the stress. And I use the example a lot of times, does the fish see the water in which it swims? Sometimes we can't even appreciate the stress when we're in the midst of it, but just kind of taking a time out and sort of doing a scan. And, again, stress can show up many different ways, but most often in middle adulthood, it starts to show up more physiologically or physically. And so doing that body scan, am I physically tight? Are my shoulders all clenched? Is my jaw clenched? All of those are really good indicators when we are stressed. And then once you do that kind of body scan, just take a deep breath, let everything relax. And, this sounds kind of weird, but bear with me here. When you practice relaxing your body, you tend to get better at it. And anything you practice it, you get better at, and relaxing is no different. So kind of just being more aware of it, and kind of practicing being relaxed more and more, your body tends to trigger that and make that its more default state.
Maybe you're just stressed, and that's why you're so tense.
Do I look stressed?
No, remember you were saying that
No,
your shoulder and your back are so tight.
Yeah.
It could be.
It could be my DBS is just a little bit
It could be that
off. It could be that I'm not on any kind of medication.
Could be a lot of things.
Yep.
Depression, we talked about, can mimic dementia. And that was just a topic that came up when you and I were talking, and I don't remember why. But is that, I mean, and we know depression is typical with people living with Parkinson's. So are you able to determine if it's actually dementia versus depression with what you do?
Yeah, and that's really where neuropsychology kind of got its birth and started. One thing that we can do is we're looking at brain functions. And so when we're giving you these tests, we're not just giving you tests and seeing how you're doing on it, but we're actually taking the raw scores, comparing it to a normative sample of individuals that's corrected mostly by age, but some other demographics. And so it's all age corrected. But so we can see, are your cognitive functions at a level that would be consistent with age, or is it something that's declined more than age? But we can also take that and say, are these cognitive functions consistent more with a Parkinson's presentation, a depression presentation, or, whatever else? So yeah, it can definitely differentially diagnose depression versus dementia versus whatever else.
So like if you feel like somebody who has Parkinson's, so I have a couple of my friends, their parents are dealing with, Parkinson's, but they're also starting to deal with, the potential dementia aspect, or they, again, they point to the fact that it's dementia. I mean, I know that there's not a lot of people that do what you do. Is it important to get that type of testing to then determine if it truly is dementia versus depression? And I'm assuming it's because of like the medication aspect, or what could that do?
So, I always tell people that neuropsychology is typically one piece of the overall puzzle. And so, if you or a loved one or whoever, if they're noticing that there's some changes going on in terms of potential cognitive functions, it's important to see a neurologist. The first thing they're going to do is order some blood work, and that just rules out, some quick, reversible causes of cognitive dysfunction. So vitamin deficiencies, things like that. The next thing they're going to do is look at an MRI of the brain, and that's going to look at any type of potential structural abnormalities that could be occurring. And then they'll order a neuropsychological evaluation. And so, I always explain to people that if the MRI looks at the structure of the brain, we look at the functioning of the brain. And that helps us to really get a good understanding for what's going on within the brain. So our tests measure different parts of the brain to see which parts are working, which parts potentially are not working. And so that can shed light on, are there cognitive changes? If there are cognitive changes, what's causing them? In other words, what's the diagnosis? And then once we get a diagnosis, that will tell us what the treatment options are.
Okay.
I am assuming you have to be able to differentiate from maybe learning styles. So just for example, like names and faces and interactions. Like I've always been that person that my friends call, say, hey, how did we meet this person? And I can tell them where we were at, what we were doing, who was there, all those things. One of them is an attorney, and he has photographic memory. He can, but then I can read it. I can read something, and a minute later, I can't tell you what I just read. So, I mean, how do you differentiate the kind of different?
Oh, when you're taking the test?
Yeah, when you're taking. I mean, like when you're trying to take the test, like maybe somebody's memory isn't good just because they don't have that recallable memory.
Yeah, and that's a great question. So, one thing that I think also kind of sets neuropsychology apart from other disciplines that may look at cognitive functioning, one of the tests that we always give looks at very specific cognitive functions that generally do not change over time, even if there was something going on within the brain, be it something like a dementia, a stroke, a traumatic brain injury, or whatever in between. We look at abilities that do not change over time, and that allows us to estimate a baseline in terms of where we'd expect you to be. Once we can estimate that baseline, then we give you all the tests, we correct them for age, and then we would expect those tests to be consistent with that estimated baseline. Any scores that fall statistically significantly below the baseline, then we say that those scores represent a decline in cognitive functioning. And then using those scores, we can see which parts of the brain are working just fine, which parts of the brain aren't working as well as they should be. And then based on which parts of the brain are showing signs of dysfunction, that tells us what type of dementia might be going on, or what parts of the brain have been affected from a traumatic brain injury, or it can help us to determine where the location of a stroke could have occurred. So that's how we use neuropsych testing to see how brains function.
So I asked for the test, and I asked for it because I felt like I was, not as strong as I should be, and I needed to prove it to myself. Is this something that should be, or maybe will be in the future, if there's enough people to support it, that if you're diagnosed with PD, that this is a test that you would do so you can get a baseline?
It definitely helps our diagnostic accuracy when we have a baseline. Mm-hmm. So I said that we give you one test where we estimate your baseline, but once we give you the test and we actually have a baseline, that definitely helps us out. Mm-hmm. So getting a baseline is always helpful. I know that here at Ohio Health, it's very common for individuals coming from the MS clinic. They send most of their patients over just to get a baseline. And I would say particularly when Parkinson's is diagnosed at a younger age, it's definitely helpful to get that baseline. And it can be helpful to do periodic check-ins. I wouldn't recommend doing it annually or anything like that. But if you do notice, that, hey, I feel like something's changed over the past 5 years, we can even give you sort of an abbreviated test just to, do the quick check-in and make sure everything's going okay. And if it seems like it's not, then we could do, more of the Cadillac workup, so to speak.
Yeah.
But it's definitely helpful to have that.
Yeah, I think it'd also be helpful to have it in the case where you need to file for disability.
Yeah, we do a lot of that.
Do you?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Like what do you do? Like, or what do they ask for?
So I would say that when it comes to disability, a lot of people coming primarily from the epilepsy clinic are coming because we know, again, epilepsy is one of those things that affects brain functioning. And so we work with them quite frequently to determine, have the seizures caused changes in our brain function or in their brain functioning? If they have, then to what degree? We can use the data to say, here are strengths and weaknesses, you can either, file for disability or, using the strength that you do have, here's a line of work that you may want to pursue if you are, really interested in staying in the workforce. So we try to use it to, identify weaknesses, but we also use it to identify strengths to highlight what the individual still can do.
That is actually really good. I never thought about that.
Yeah, I knew a couple of people that were doing different things for baseline just to have that. So if 4 or 5 years down the road, if they needed to go back and say, my cognitive memory or my cognitive brain interaction is not what it was 5 years ago.
Right.
Yeah.
Maybe I should get mine tested again after I work this full 6 months to a year and say it went back down. It went back down, which I can tell. I mean, I really can tell a difference. Like over those past 3 years, I knew I was much stronger and sharper. But it's because I wasn't doing the same work and having that same stress level. Now that I'm kind of back in it again, I'm not going down by any means, but I can already tell the times when I'm like, I can't think of a word, or I'm trying to like figure out what I'm saying.
Yeah. And I know Dr. Hinkle used to say this, maybe he'd say, but just because you can't come up with a name or something like that, he'd be like, that you're getting older.
No, but I can tell.
That happens to all of us. He'd be like, you can't blame everything on Parkinson.
Yes, I can.
I know, I do too. But
well, no, this one I actually can, because now that I was working full time and I knew what it was like. And then I took 3 months or 3 years of working part time, and I could tell. I mean, even just like in like certain work instances, like people were just like, what? You're really, you're doing good and da-da-da. I'm like, I can feel it. And now that I'm only like a month in, but still just like, I can see how I was and like where it can go. So yeah, say all you want. It's Parkinson's related.
All right.
Well, we always feel better at the beginning of the race also.
Yes. So no, this was great. I'm trying to think. Was there any other thing? I feel like you and we had such a long conversation. Thank you very much for spending that much time with me when you were in the office.
You're very welcome.
But I just thought it was just such a really interesting information that I feel like, again, like we talk about it, like in terms of like stress or even like just, depression and what that can do to people. But it's almost like, because you can't see it, right? It's all up here. Like you can't see what it's doing.
Well, it's just like, I don't know about you, but when I first got diagnosed, I thought I was just imagining everything. I was imagining that I was having problems with doing these things, or I couldn't reach my back pocket and pull out my wallet. I was just imagining that's not really happening. It's,
Really?
Oh yeah.
What do you mean imagining it?
Well, more like things would just happen, and I would just say, no,
Oh, that didn't really happen, or like it's.
No, it's just more of it's a mental thing. It's not a physical thing for me. I'm mentally not allowing myself to reach back behind me and get my wallet out or smile.
Smile.
Well, and it's like when we're younger and, you forget something and you don't think twice about it. But then when you get in your 70s, you forget something and you're like, oh, no, here comes Alzheimer's. You maybe tend to blame it on things and, who knows. But
Right.
Oh, what always frustrated me is like I could tell, like I'd be trying to talk to somebody about a TV show. I couldn't think of the name of the TV show. I could tell you all the actors, who they were, with the whole storyline behind the TV show, but I can't think of that. I couldn't think of that TV show. And I was like, wait a minute, that's a very basic thing that I should understand.
Like, it's Parkinson's.
Yeah.
Well, and for the record, those word finding difficulties are hands down the most common complaint that I hear people coming in with. And it's the most common thing that tends to increase in frequency just as we normally age. So if that does happen, don't become overly worried. That's a normal byproduct. And it tends to get exacerbated when we're stressed out, when we're frustrated, and when we're tired.
I love when, like, my grandma used to do this. Like, she used to call me, like, all of her grandkids. Like, she'd call you every grandkid's name except your own. Yeah. You're like, Trisha, Michael, Jessica, which one are you? And then I do that. Like, if I'm like mad at something at home, I call, like, either I'll accidentally say the dog's name or like the kid's name, and I'm trying, or Derek, and it's like, but again, that's normal.
Yeah.
I'm guilty of it myself.
Sure, Jess. It's normal,
stop. All right. Well, hey, thank you so much for coming on. We really appreciate your time and your expertise in this area.
Thanks for having me. I appreciate it.
In our last 30 seconds, I will leave you with this. If you haven't had a neuropsychology test, talk to your doctor. It might be something worth looking into just to get a baseline. It really is important for you to understand the impact that stress can have, not just on your physical body, but your mental, cognitive abilities as well. And then don't forget that just because we're experiencing Parkinson's and there might be an aspect of dementia in there, depression can also be an issue with that. So always talk to your doctor, find out more, keep learning, and we'll see you next time.